I was standing in the corner of the Grand Meridian Ballroom, champagne flute in hand, watching the crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across 200 faces. Everyone who mattered in Boston's tech scene was here. My father, Richard Chen, founder and CEO of Vertex Technologies, was about to announce his retirement after 35 years, and everyone knew what came next. Me, Marcus Chen, his only son, the heir apparent. I'd spent the last decade earning this moment: Harvard MBA, 5 years at Goldman, 3 years as Vertex's VP of Strategy, where I doubled our profit margins by streamlining operations, which was a polite way of saying I'd cut the fat. Old employees who couldn't keep up with the pace of modern tech, redundant positions, unnecessary expenses. My father always said business was war, and I'd learned to be a soldier. But right now, something was bothering me. There was a man sitting at one of the back tables, wearing a cheap gray janitor's uniform with Mike embroidered on the chest pocket. He looked about 60, with weathered hands and silver hair. He wasn't eating the $500 a plate dinner, just sitting there, watching. I caught the eye of Jennifer, our events coordinator, and tilted my head toward the back. She followed my gaze, frowned, and hurried over to me. "Who let the maintenance staff stay for the dinner?" I asked, keeping my voice low. I don't know, Marcus. I'll handle it." Quietly. "I don't want a scene before Dad's speech." She nodded and started making her way through the tables. But before she could reach him, my father stood up at the head table. The room fell silent. Jennifer stopped mid-step and returned to the wall, looking uncomfortable. "Thank you all for being here tonight," my father began, his voice strong despite his 70 years. 35 years ago, I started Vertex in my garage with $2,000 and a dream. I'd heard this story 100 times. The humble beginnings, the early struggles, the breakthrough patent that launched everything. I smiled and nodded at the appropriate moments, but my mind was already rehearsing my own speech. I'd kept it humble, grateful. I'd thank my father, acknowledge the team, promise to honor his legacy while driving innovation forward. "I've been blessed beyond measure," Dad continued. "This company has given me everything. But more importantly, it's taught me what really matters in life." He paused, and something in his tone made me straighten up. This wasn't part of the usual speech. When I built Vertex, I had a simple philosophy: treat people right and success will follow. But somewhere along the way, I wondered if I'd actually lived up to that. If I'd just been talking the talk without walking the walk. So 3 years ago, I decided to run an experiment. 3 years ago. That was right when I joined Vertex as VP. A cold feeling started spreading through my chest. "I hired someone to help me," Dad said, gesturing toward the back of the room. "Mike, could you stand up, please?" The janitor rose slowly from his chair. Every head in the ballroom turned to look at him. I felt my face flush hot. "This is Michael Richardson," my father announced. "And he's not actually a janitor. He's the former CEO of TechBridge Solutions. He sold his company for $400 million in 2015 and retired. But I convinced him to come out of retirement for a special project. For the past 3 years, Mike has been working at Vertex. Not as an executive, as maintenance staff, cleaning our offices, fixing our equipment, observing." My mouth went dry. I thought back over the last 3 years. How many times had I seen that janitor? How many times had I walked past him without a glance? How many times had I... The purpose, Dad continued, was simple. I wanted to know who we really were when nobody important was watching. How did we treat the people we considered beneath us? The people who kept our offices running but never got invited to the executive meetings? He picked up a leather folder from the table in front of him. Mike kept detailed notes. With my permission, he documented hundreds of interactions. And tonight, before I announce my succession plan, I'm going to share some of those notes. Because I believe character isn't what you do when everyone's watching. It's what you do when you think no one is. The room was absolutely silent. I couldn't breathe. My father opened the folder and pulled out the first page. March 7th, 3 years ago. Mike's second week. He was mopping the executive floor at 7 p.m. Most people had gone home, but Marcus was still in his office. On a conference call, Mike overheard him say, and I quote, "I don't care if it's 3 weeks before Christmas. If they can't meet the Q4 targets, they're gone." We're not running a charity here. I remembered that call. We'd been discussing the underperforming sales team. It was just business, just strategy. Mike noted. Dad continued that Marcus never once looked up from his desk to acknowledge him, even when Mike emptied his trash can. Even when Mike said, "Good night, sir," nothing. Not even a nod. "Dad," I started, but he held up his hand. "I'm not finished." June 15th, same year. Mike was fixing a jammed printer on the third floor. A young engineer named Sarah Patel was working late, visibly stressed. Mike asked if she was okay. She broke down crying, said she'd just been told by her supervisor Marcus that her project was being scrapped and her position eliminated. She had a 6-month-old daughter at home. Mike wrote that she said, "He didn't even look sorry. Just said it was a resource allocation decision and I had 2 weeks." My throat felt tight. I remembered Sarah, brilliant coder, but her project hadn't been scalable. It was the right business decision. September 23rd. Mike was eating lunch in the break room. Marcus came in, saw him, and immediately left to eat somewhere else. Mike noted that this happened multiple times. He wondered if Marcus simply didn't want to share space with maintenance staff. That wasn't why I'd left. I'd just been busy. I'd needed to make calls. It had nothing to do with, but I couldn't remember. Maybe it had been. My father looked up from the papers, his eyes finding mine across the room. There was no anger in them, just sadness. "I have 17 pages of notes like this," he said quietly. 17 pages spanning 3 years. "And Marcus, you're not the only one mentioned. Many people are in here, but you appear on almost every page. Because Mike spent most of his time on the executive floor, and you were there more than anyone else." My hands were shaking. I set down my champagne flute before I could drop it. "There are a few bright spots," Dad continued, flipping through the pages. December 19th, 2 years ago, Marcus stayed late to help IT resolve a server crisis. Even though it wasn't his department, he worked through the night alongside the tech team. Mike noted that Marcus seemed genuinely concerned about getting systems back up for the customer service team. I remembered that night. We'd been racing against time, and I'd felt that old thrill of solving a problem together. It reminded me of why I'd fallen in love with tech in the first place. And February 3rd, last year, Marcus noticed that one of the junior analysts, Tom Brady, no relation to the quarterback, had been wearing the same clothes 2 days in a row. Marcus pulled him aside privately and asked if everything was okay. Turned out Tom's apartment had flooded, and he was sleeping in his car. Marcus got him set up in a hotel that night and helped him find a new apartment. Mike wrote that Tom said, "Mr. Chen literally saved my life." I'd forgotten about that. Tom was still with the company. Good kid. Really good. But these moments, Dad said, closing the folder, were exceptions. The overwhelming pattern that Mike observed was a young man who had become so focused on metrics, efficiency, and climbing the ladder that he'd forgotten the first rule of leadership. People aren't resources. They're human beings. And how you treat them when they can't help your career is who you really are. The room felt like it was tilting. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me, but I couldn't look at any of them. "I take responsibility for this," my father said, his voice softer now. "I taught you that business was war, that only the strong survive. That sentiment has no place in a boardroom, and you learned those lessons perfectly, maybe too perfectly." He picked up another document from the table. This one looked official, legal. Tonight, I was supposed to announce that Marcus would be taking over as CEO. That's what everyone expected. It's what Marcus expected, and 6 months ago, it was exactly what I planned to do. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. "But I can't do that now," Dad said. "Not yet. Because I realized that if I hand Marcus this company tomorrow, he'll run it exactly the way he's been running his division. Efficiently, profitably, and soullessly. In 10 years, Vertex will be bigger and richer, and everyone who works here will hate their lives." Someone in the room gasped. I think it might have been my mother. "So, here's what's going to happen," my father continued. "Effective immediately, Jennifer Park will take over as interim CEO. Jennifer, our events coordinator." I stared at her in shock. She looked equally stunned. "Jennifer started at Vertex 8 years ago as a receptionist," Dad explained. "She worked her way up through operations, project management, and events. Every person in this company knows her name, not because she's powerful, but because she remembers birthdays. She knows about people's kids. She asks how your weekend was and actually listens to the answer. Last year, when we had layoffs, Jennifer personally met with every affected employee and helped them update their resumes and make connections. Mike watched her do it. He said it was the most compassionate leadership he'd seen in 40 years of business. Jennifer had tears running down her face. Dad smiled at her warmly, then turned back to address the room. Marcus, you're not losing your job, but you are losing your title. For the next 2 years, you'll be working in a new position I'm creating, executive apprentice. You'll rotate through every department in this company. 1 month in customer service, 1 month in facilities, 1 month in entry-level sales, 1 month in IT support. You'll learn every job from the ground up. And more importantly, you'll learn the names and stories of the people doing those jobs. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. If, after 2 years, you've demonstrated that you understand what Vertex is really built on, not technology, not patents, but people, then we'll revisit the succession plan. Jennifer has agreed to serve as CEO for 3 years, with an option to extend if needed. She'll mentor you. Mike has also agreed to stay on as a special advisor. And I'll be watching. My father's eyes found mine again. This time, I saw something that broke me. Hope. Despite everything, he still had hope that I could change. I love you, son, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I'm proud of everything you've accomplished. But I won't let you become the kind of leader who treats people as disposable. Not on my watch. This isn't a punishment. It's an intervention. And it's the greatest gift I can give you. He set down the papers and looked out at the assembled crowd. To everyone else here tonight, thank you for building this company with me. Thank you for your patience with my experiment. And thank you for giving Marcus a chance to become the leader I know he can be. Now, please, enjoy your dinner. There's an open bar, and I'm told the chocolate soufflé is exceptional. The ballroom erupted in scattered applause, but it felt uncertain. Confused, people started murmuring to each other, stealing glances at me. I stood there, frozen, as my father stepped down from the podium and walked toward me. When he reached me, he put his hand on my shoulder. "Walk with me," he said quietly. I followed him out of the ballroom in a daze, through the marble corridors of the hotel, out into the cold November air. We stood on the terrace overlooking Boston Harbor, the city lights reflecting off the black water. "I know you're angry," Dad said, "maybe humiliated. But I need you to understand something. When I look at Mike's notes, I don't see a bad person. I see my son. I see someone who learned to survive in a brutal world by becoming brutal himself. And I see that it's my fault for teaching you that was the only way." "I thought I was doing everything right," I said, my voice hoarse. "The numbers were good. We were profitable. We were growing. You were," Dad agreed. "But Marcus, do you remember why I started this company?" I'd heard the story so many times it should have been automatic. But standing there in the cold, my mind was blank. "I started it because I'd spent 10 years working for men who treated me like a machine," Dad said. "Men who saw me as a unit of production, not a human being. I swore that if I ever built something of my own, it would be different. It would be a place where people could do great work and still have dignity, where they could be successful and still be decent." He turned to look at me. "You've forgotten that. Or maybe I never taught it to you properly. Either way, we're fixing it now. Not because I want to embarrass you, but because I love you too much to let you become someone you'll hate when you're my age." I thought about the man in the janitor's uniform sitting in that ballroom. How many times had I seen him over the years? How many times had I walked past without seeing him at all? "What if I can't do it?" I asked quietly. "What if this is just who I am?" "Then you'll prove me wrong," Dad said simply. "But I don't think you will. Because I've seen glimpses of the man you could be. Like when you helped Tom. Like that night with the servers when you were just part of a team trying to solve a problem, not the boss trying to prove something. Those moments are in there. We just need to bring them out more often." We stood in silence for a while, watching the boats in the harbor. "Mike wants to have coffee with you tomorrow," Dad said finally. 9 a.m. at that place in Cambridge you like. He said he has some things he'd like to discuss. I hope you'll go. Does he hate me? I asked. No. He says you remind him of himself at your age. Before he learned the hard lessons. He wants to help you learn them the easier way. My father squeezed my shoulder once more, then headed back inside, leaving me alone on the terrace. I stood there for a long time, replaying the last 3 years in my mind. All the faces I couldn't quite remember, all the names I'd never learned, all the moments I'd been too busy, too focused, too important to notice the human beings around me. My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer, "You okay?" I stared at it for a moment, then typed back, "No, but I will be." And Jennifer, "Congratulations. You'll be an amazing CEO." 3 dots appeared, then, "Thank you. That means a lot. See you Monday?" See you Monday. I put my phone away and took a deep breath of cold air. Somewhere behind me, through the glass doors, I could hear the party continuing. My party. Or what was supposed to be my party. But maybe Dad was right. Maybe this wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was the greatest gift anyone had ever given me. The chance to become someone better. Someone who didn't need to wait until they were 60 to learn that people mattered more than profits. I pulled out my phone again and opened my contacts. Scrolled down to Sarah Patel. I kept her number even after she left the company, though I'd never used it. I started typing, "Sarah, this is Marcus Chen from Vertex. I know it's been a long time, but I wanted to reach out and..." I stopped. What could I possibly say that would matter? That I was sorry I'd treated her like a line item instead of a person? That I'd learned my lesson 3 years too late? But I kept typing anyway, because maybe that was the point. Maybe it was never too late to start learning, to apologize. You deserved better than how I handled your situation. I hope you're doing well, and if you're ever open to it, I'd like to buy you coffee and hear how your daughter is doing. No agenda. Just one human being to another. Take care, Marcus. I hit send before I could overthink it. Then I scrolled back up through my contacts, looking at all the names of people I'd worked with, people I'd dismissed, people I'd never really seen. It was going to be a long 2 years, maybe longer, but standing there on that terrace, looking out at the city where my father had built something meaningful, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not shame, though there was plenty of that. Not anger, though that was there too. What I felt was possibility. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, I could become the kind of man who didn't need someone in a janitor's uniform to remind him how to be human. I finished my drink, straightened my tie, and walked back into the ballroom. I had 200 people to apologize to, and I had the rest of my life to become worthy of a company I'd taken for granted. It was time to start.